Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining your podcast, Putting the Talent Pieces Together. I'm your host, Carlos Ilcid, and today we have a dear friend, someone that I admire and respect a lot for what you're doing, Ali in the ATL.
Yes.
All right, so Ali, welcome in. Very excited to have you. Definitely look forward to learn more about your journey. I know some things, but for our audience, definitely share what you have done, and especially what you're up to with the Atlanta Tech Village. So who is Ali in the ATL and how she ended up being the managing director of the fourth largest tech hub in the United States.
That is a much longer story than we have time for today, Carlos, but I will try to truncate it a little bit. And all of this is challenging because I'm a talker. So I'm actually a recovering journalist. I was a copy editor and a page designer for 6 or 7 years for several major metro dailies. My husband and I moved to Atlanta right when journalism sort of was having some challenges in 2008. And I knew Pulitzer Prize winners who couldn't get jobs, and I didn't have one of those. So I was definitely not getting hired. So we did a little bit of pivoting and shifting, and I ended up working for a medical related company for a little while in marketing and got my MBA at Georgia State at night. And at some point, I realized that the thing that I missed about working in newspapers was this sense of camaraderie with a small team, with a lot of people doing something they loved for the reward of doing that thing, not for money. Lord knows we worked nights, weekends, Christmases,
Right.
holidays. And it turns out that that aspect of journalism and newspapers was present in startups. So I basically showed up at Atlanta Tech Village events until somebody hired me.
Oh yeah. Oh, and I definitely agree. Like I've mentioned in multiple chances that I have to do like public speaking for people that is looking to be a startup founder and how they make the whole sexy thing about being a startup founder.
Oh, being
It
a startup founder is not
yeah.
sexy. It's not.
If you want to have money, get a corporate job.
Yeah.
You're gonna have immediate rewards there. But we'll get about some of that journey as startup founders in a minute. So what was that company and what were you doing for them? And then how did you transition to Atlanta Tech Village managing director role?
Yeah. So the company that I ended up working for was Sales Loft. I happened to go to several events with Kyle Porter and Rob Foreman, and we hit it off. He eventually sent me an email that said, "Hey, I would love it if you would come work for me at this startup in client success. And this would be my reaction if you would consider it." And there was like a gif of a gymnast going like this. And I looked at my husband and I said, "I think I'm going to go meet for coffee and get a new job." And he was like, you just got your MBA. What are we doing? And I was like, "I don't know, but I'm going to do a startup, I think." And he was like, "Okay." I'm confused, but supportive. But
Hey,
but sure. And so I met with Kyle and I was like, "I don't know what a client success manager is." And he was like, "I'm not really sure either, but we're going to figure it out together." It was early on before client success and customer success was really a thing. He had hired Katie Rogers, who then went on to work at Calendly. She built the entire customer success department at SalesLoft before customer success was well known at all. And so I worked with her there for a while. And then I did customer support and technical support. And then I was a product manager. And then I was chief of staff. We did the first chief of staff there and kind of made that position up as well. And then I was head of community and worked with our influencers and influencer marketing. Um, and I was really a lofter for life, frankly. I had been there 8 years. I knew how great the culture was, how
yeah.
rare it was. We grew up at Atlanta Tech Village. I started with them in 2014. We graduated out of the village. We had too many people, which is a great problem to have. We moved next door to what is now TechRise. It was not TechRise then. It was a lot more, um, I like to call it hamburger marble. It was very
I've
pink.
so this is a thing that I've been doing lately. I go to Google Photos and see like the old place. And I was like, oh, wow,
Yeah,
very different.
it's the sister building actually to Atlanta Tech Village. So you could see for a long time what ATV had looked at or looked like before
Yep.
David revamped it. And so we were there for a little while and then we graduated out of that space into Regents Plaza downtown. I loved it. I was enjoying every second of it. And I got yet again an email from collectively the Davids, so David Lightburn and David Cummings. And they said, we are making up a new position. Karen Houghton, who had been worked her way up all the way to, I believe, VP of Community at ATV. She came with David Cummings from Pardot, helped create the ATV we know today. She had finally gotten a startup bug after like 8 or 10
Yep.
years, and she left to start her own startup, Infinite Giving, which is actually now based in ATV, and we're very excited and supportive. But she left, and David Lightburn sort of ran things from an operational standpoint for a little while and realized that all the things that Karen had been doing were much harder than he realized.
Oh yeah.
And so they reached out to me and said, we have a role that we've made up called managing director, and we have 3 vague bullet points. Would you like to do it? And I was like, I don't know what that is, but when the Davids make you an offer, you don't say no.
And it sounds very startup,
Right? Well, the first thing I did was say, we have to talk to Kyle and Rob because I'm not walking out on anything with them. And
Right.
David was a board member and an early investor and a repeat investor and had been a longtime mentor for Kyle. And it was very important to me that we were maintaining all of those relationships. And Kyle was, and Rob both were incredibly supportive of me moving over here to Atlanta Tech Village on the admin side.
Well, that's great, and we're very thankful to have you. I say
Thank you.
this as a villager. My office is still here in the Atlanta Tech Village, and I hope it continues to be until you and the rest of the team kick me out. But hopefully, that's not anytime soon.
You know, I hope it does come to a point where your team is so large that we have to say, Carlos, you have to get out.
That's a good problem to have. But one of the things that I also wanted to share in today's episode, it's very interesting. But the first time that I heard about the Atlanta Tech Village, I was sitting at a coffee shop in Honduras.
Really?
Yeah. So this is how it started. And it's very tied to my journey at Puzzle and how I started defining the idea or the concept or the thesis of what I wanted to do as a business and the audience that I wanted to serve. So sitting in a coffee shop trying to figure out, okay, like I want to do like recruitment and staffing. I definitely want to do it in the US. I think, I've always been a huge advocate for LATAM talent. So I definitely think like we have the potential to showcase, the Latin talent, Latin America talent in the United States. So the first thing was like, what's the city?
Mm-hmm.
In my process of figuring out what was the city, the reason why I choose Atlanta, it's because of the Atlanta Tech Village. Because,
oh,
oh,
I feel very fancy now.
hear me out. Google search is very powerful. And if you're a startup founder, you need to work on your SEO. It's very important. Like you have no idea how critical it is. So the first thing that came out, because I looked for top tech cities, Atlanta was in the list. When I started doing research about Atlanta, first thing, poop, Atlanta Tech Village. So it was a place that, in my opinion, back then was like, okay, my clients can be there, but I can also evolve as an entrepreneur and as a founder while being there. So at that point, I was like 4th largest tech hub in the United States. I mean, I don't have to look for anything else. Like I want to be here. And then that's how I had my first conversation with Julie and this is very funny, but every time that you're starting the next Uber, the next big thing, you have this big talk, but you're like 2 weeks into being a startup founder. And I'm like, yeah, so I'm building a solution for talent for companies. And Julie's like, oh, really? That's great. But I loved how she could determine like, okay, he's a cultural fit because he has this desire to be this great startup founder. And that's kind of what the village has helped on, from having advisors, having mentors, having just fellow founders, right? And that's one of the things that I wanted to have your opinion on is, what is the village about? Because this is not an office space. I mean, that's how it starts. That's the very basic description.
There is office space.
There is office space, but it is not the whole purpose of the building itself, right? So this is more about community, and I want to have your opinion on why community matters for building a business.
Yeah. So I actually like to say I don't sell office space. I sell community because there's lots of office space to be had, especially right now. it doesn't come with the serendipitous interactions that Atlanta Tech Village specializes in. And what I mean about that is that it's similar to the old-fashioned kind of concept of a water cooler moment. You're standing at the water cooler talking to somebody else overhears it, they have an idea that might be beneficial. That kind of situation plays itself out over and over again in Atlanta Tech Village. You're in the elevator, you're in the coffee shop line, you're in the community center, you're in the shared community kitchens, you're at Startup Chowdown, and you are talking to somebody else about something, and either they or somebody nearby or somebody that they know has something that can add value to that conversation, or you have something to add value to their conversation. And it happens a lot here. We have people who were individual founders that weren't quite finding the success that they wanted. They met each other, they realized they could do more together, and now they have very successful startups together as co-founders instead
Wow.
of individually building side by side. And that's really what we're here for, is we're here to allow people to learn from others who's made the mistakes already, who's had successes in things, but lean into a community of people who are doing the same thing you're doing at the same time and understand how hard it is, but also how rewarding it is. So Atlanta as an ecosystem, collaboration is our superpower. And Atlanta Tech Village is a microcosm of that in a lot of ways. But we also partner with the other hubs across the city as
Right.
well in the entire metro area. Sometimes we're not quite the right fit, and I will reach out to ATDC, for example, or Tech Alpharetta, or Atlanta Tech Park, or the Russell Center. There's so many spaces in town that are doing amazing work, and all of us bring something slightly different to the conversation.
Yeah.
But overall, rising tide raises all ships for the Atlanta ecosystem.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I thought was also very impressive. We're not fighting for who is leasing more offices. Again,
No.
because it's about community.
Yes.
And the fact that all the hubs in the city can work together serves to that purpose
Mhm.
of saying this is not of who has more office space and who has the
No.
best rate. It's like how we can build an ecosystem that in the long run can serve as a key factor of the city's growth, because
Exactly.
sometimes we think about startups and we say, oh yeah, it's going to be a small business, medium-sized business, but we're talking about sales loves of the world, we're talking
Mhm.
about the Calendlys of the world. I was very impressed again when I first started doing the research of the Atlanta Tech Village, and I was like, Calendly, like,
Yep.
wow, like that's a big logo, and
And Taupe started here with, like, a reserve desk, I think. It wasn't even
yeah,
a full office, and they grew up side by side with us at Salesloft.
exactly, and then there's a lot of stories. If you ever come to the Atlanta Tech Village, there's a graduates wall,
Mhm.
and it's just getting bigger, right? And it talks
Yes.
about how those companies have taken that step from being a startup to being a small business to being a medium-sized business to being a big enterprise
To
these
being
days.
global at this point. Yes.
So, talking about how a lot of companies have become unicorns here, how
Mhm.
a lot of companies have scale here, what is your opinion about, I guess, COVID show everyone a different reality about remote work? It
Yeah.
got us to a point where we think that everything can be done from home. I work from home time to time. I'm not saying that it's bad, but especially if you're a startup founder, and I I don't think there's a secret sauce or a playbook to be successful in the startup world, but there's definitely components that help along the way of what
Mhm.
you're building. And community is one of those. So
Mhm.
while there are different paths to success, what is your opinion about actually being present while scaling your business, showing up to events, and talking to
Yeah.
people?
So, this is an interesting question for me because I'm a strong extrovert. I'm the person that people will go up to in the middle of the grocery store and be like, "Hi, I don't know you, but do you think this kind of flower or this kind of flower?" Like, this happens a lot. I guess, look approachable and extroverted, and I will happily talk to them about my theories on flower. But it is something that I know is harder for a lot of people. There's a lot of introverts or even extroverted introverts. So you think they're an extrovert, but they actually are getting really tired talking to people at an
That
event.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, my husband's one of those. So if you met him at an event, you'd be like, "Oh, he's so extroverted," but he's gonna come home and be like, "Please don't talk to me for a little while. Like, I just need to recharge."
Oh, trust me, my wife knows best.
Yes. I am not that person. I get very hopped up by talking to people. So my perception of this is a little different. But one of the things I think is really important about that collaboration piece that happens in Atlanta is it tends to be built on trust and familiarity. So the more events that you physically go to, the more faces you're going to know, the more connections you're going to make, the more pictures of people's kids or their dog or their pet or their
Right.
parents or their siblings. You're going to see that you know more about them as a person. And then when something comes along, you think of them or they think of you. because the essence of being successful in community, frankly, is people putting your name in rooms when you're not in them.
Yeah.
And that requires connection
And authenticity.
and authenticity.
Because one of the things that in my journey, again, if you come from corporate America, if you have already worked for a, a bigger enterprise,
Mhm.
and my version of this is corporate America nearshore, because I was still
Sure.
working in Honduras, but I was working for a U.S. company, right? So for me, the appearance of big talk, of
Mhm.
my wife will come in to the office time to time with me, and I'm like, we need to have like certain level of space. We need to look professional. I need to, and then everyone was like so fresh and so casual, and it was a reality shock at some point, but also helped me understand that the more authentic you are about your
Yes.
journey, what you're trying to achieve, and what you have already achieved, it's what will really drive successful conversations and business opportunities. Because it's not like you're knocking on everyone's door around the building soliciting like, hey, do you want talent?
Yes, we don't actually allow that, by
It's
the
not
way.
permitted. I've tried it. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, talking about that, it's really creating meaningful and lasting relations, even if they're not going to be your client today.
Yeah, you don't go into the conversations and these events with, "What can you do for me?" You go into them and ask, "How can I help you?"
Absolutely.
And we have really amazing folks here who ask that all the time. How can I help? What can I do? Bring things to the table without even being asked. And that drives other people to then do the same thing. And it becomes this really wonderful, like, pay it forward, which is one of our core values.
Absolutely.
The momentum that happens from that. Now, the other thing I will say is those serendipitous interactions I mentioned, the overhearing a conversation in the coffee shop where somebody's struggling with something and somebody else is like, "Hey, I don't mean to interrupt, but I had that same problem and here's an area that we found
Right.
that helped us." Those conversations don't happen in a Zoom chat window.
Never.
They happen in person. And I know that introverts are like, I have a friend who is an introvert. She ran a hub for a long time and she realized that part of her job had to be going out and talking to people. So she would tell those of us who were friends with her that we're going to be at the same event. My job is I have to talk to 3 people I don't know before I can talk to a person I do know. And so she would show up at the event and we'd see her and she'd say, "Hey," and we're like, "Did you talk to your people?" And she's like, "No." And we're like, "Go do that and then come back."
Community
And
support.
yes, so we held her accountable and she would go talk to the people and build those trusted relationships and networks, so that then what happens is this is a little bit like when you buy a car. You buy a new car and then you see your new car out on the road everywhere. You're like, "Oh, they have the same Toyota I have now." And it's not that there were more cars out there, that car didn't suddenly overnight become a success. It was already there. You
You
just
started
didn't
paying
see it.
attention.
So once you talk to people and you're like, "Oh, I know somebody who invests in, for example, clean tech." And then maybe the next day you run into a clean tech founder who really needs an investor and they're the right fit. You can then turn around and make that connection because now you have something top of mind with people that you have a trusted relationship with. And that's really what it is that we specialize in at
Right.
ATV. But in Atlanta as a whole, I just had a discussion with on the subject of clean tech, a clean tech founder yesterday. And then today I had a conversation with the new managing director of the new clean tech hub that's coming in that Cox is
It's a
backing.
perfect click.
And I was like, "Hey, I'm going to send you a company because I think they'd be a great
Awesome.
fit. They currently aren't in Atlanta. I think they should be in Atlanta. I'm going to send them to you."
You know what's the funniest part of this is when I first started hearing the whole "How can I help you?"
Mhm.
it it will freak me out. I was like,
Why?
because I was like, no, I'm not asking for help. I am offering you help. Because it's the
This
whole
is
mindset.
reciprocal, Carlos.
Exactly. And that's how, again, the more you show up,
Mhm.
the more you open conversations, the more you get to understand
Yeah.
that that's the whole purpose. It's building a community of entrepreneurs that
Mhm.
will continue to grow and scale together. So I felt that was kind of a funny thing, but it really is. It's, you learn how to talk as an entrepreneur, how to use those best practices. And I've had this with you in multiple like networking events where you're like, Carlos, talk about you being profitable, or talk about you
Yeah,
scaling
you're
your
burying
team.
the lead here,
and
Carlos.
and I'm like, why do I need to show off? It sounds like, and you were the one to show me like it's not showing off, it's just showing your badges.
It's lending
It's
credibility.
leading credibility. and
Mhm.
and and that, I think that was also a great learning for me, and again serves to the purpose of community. Now, the other part is, while we think that, or while we both agree that for founders to show up on the events, network, connect with people in person, it's very relevant. Companies, while scaling, they
Mm-hmm.
get to have talent in office. Now we got hybrid as a thing.
Yeah,
That we still have teams that are fully remote, and then we have people that has talent near shore, right,
sure.
or in different geolocations across the world. So do you think there is a better solution than the other, or do you feel, based on the experience that you have and the companies that you have seen grown within the village,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a one shirt fits for all, or that multiple companies can opt for different options?
I think it's the second part. Each company is going to be a little bit different. Each company culture is going to be a little bit different. And tech is your friend in this case, right?
Yeah.
You can use tech to tie people together, even if they're not physically in the same room. So I know I said that serendipitous interactions don't happen in Zoom chat windows, but what can happen is they can happen in a Zoom.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it this way. When I worked at SalesLoft pre-pandemic, people weren't constantly on Zooms. We were a Zoom culture in a lot of ways because we had started building a few of our remote offices at that point. But at some point, we had an engineer, Jody, who his wife had an amazing job offer in Indiana. So they moved to Indiana. But Jody was such an amazing engineer that we were like, we're going to make this work. We're going to keep you on the team. So what we did is we had a rolling cart with a TV that lived in the engineering pod that he was a member of, and Jody was on Zoom all day in that pod. The joke was Jody lived in the TV. And like once a month he would come into town and we'd be like, Jody's out of the TV. But all day Jody was a part of the team. He overheard the interactions. He was there for any random questions. He was as close as he could be physically in that room, in that pod with the product managers and the engineers that he worked with on a daily basis. And his like toddler daughter would bring him lunch on the screen in the TV, and it was a
Oh,
cute. But it created a rapport with Jody that was as if he were physically in that room. And I think that the biggest challenge people have with fully remote teams or hybrid teams or offshore teams is the time difference where everybody's on like a different time and it's really
right.
hard to get together. And there's this chunk of time in the middle of the day that overlaps, but you're 6 hours off here, 4 hours off here. I think nearshoring can solve that in a lot of ways, especially if you're in the same time zone, that you
Right.
fix a lot of the gaps. It can be done either way. It can involve a Zoom. It can involve a Slack culture where everybody's having a conversation all the time. The night shift has some conversation and the day shift can come in and pick up that conversation because they
Right.
can see the history of it. So I think there's ways that technology can help you do that. And if you're a growing and scaling team, you can't necessarily afford the going rate of an engineer from Georgia Tech, but you might be able to afford the going rate of an engineer from Honduras.
Go Honduras. But going to that point, I think before the technology component helping you kind of connect with them, it's the cultural component,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're very intentional about the culture that you want to have across your team, regardless of if they are staffed by someone else or if they are in your same office or in the same city. So part of that is, and I have a very interesting like use cases or case studies with Puzzle, where whenever we talk to not just current clients but with prospects, is tell us about your culture. Like
Yeah.
how will you handle, and what will be the right cultural fit for your business that we can find for you? Because talent skill set, it's more like by the book. You
Sure.
make the right assessment, but also finding a connection that will last in the long run, that will help with not losing people that fast, people wanting to stay and feeling committed to the project. But also it's how then we'd look to ideas on happy hours.
Yes.
And given that we're in the same time zone, I think that's very beneficial. But the other day we did a happy hour with one of our clients, and what we did is that we figure out logistics around how can we deliver the DoorDash
Mm-hmm.
of each country
Yes.
so
Oh,
we
I
can
love it.
send them their favorite beer, and then we find that sometimes like our difference will be 2 or 3 hours, so it's not that significant. So
Yeah.
everyone was already Friday end of day. Let's have a beer, and hey, let's talk about what do you guys drink in Dominican Republic, and
Mm-hmm.
why is it the best beer in the world? Because everyone from their country thinks their beer is the best. I think Honduran beer is the best.
Of course you do.
Uh,
Not biased at all.
not biased at all, but yeah, it's how how teams, before looking into those technology components, before scaling, they have to look into culture. I think that's
Yes.
kind of my takeaway from everything we have spoken today, because it comes from how you're starting your business, how you're networking out there, how you're looking to scale, and how culture impacts everything.
It absolutely does. Culture and knowing what kind of culture your company has, um, it it changes the way people view your company. It changes the way your customers view your company. It changes the way people at your company invite folks they trust to come work there.
Right.
It changes the entire conversation. And I think David Cummings and Kyle Porter both had some sayings around, if you don't create a company culture, you're going to have one. It's just not going to be an intentional one, and it may not be the culture you want.
Yeah, what you want, yeah.
So you have to spend the time thinking about that. Core values are a huge part. They were a huge part of SalesLoft, a big part of Pardot, and are a big part of Atlanta Tech Village. And our core values are all over the place. They're on the walls. They're on our key cards when we had key cards. They're on T-shirts. They're everywhere because we live by those. And some of them are easy to understand. Work hard, play hard is always a fun one. Pay it forward, dream big. Be nice is one of our core values. And it's one that I think a lot of people sort of are like, oh, that's a soft value. But we mean it as a no jerks policy.
Yep.
Startups are hard enough. Let's not work with jerks. And we will relocate you out of being a villager if you are consistently a jerk. And I have to say consistently because sometimes people just have tough days. You know,
Right,
you make
right.
a mistake. You have to learn from it and apologize for it. There are obviously some like zero option things that can happen. But in general, we've discovered most of our villagers just need a little reminder that
Gentle,
be
polite reminder.
nice is a core value, and we need them to abide by that. And having the trust that we are going to be able to support and police that culture in that way is really important to not only our founders, but the people who work for them here.
Absolutely. You know, last thing I'm gonna say is, you could see how core values of the Atlanta Tech Village then get reflected into each of the companies. On the puzzle
Mhm.
side, in my personal story, I can say now I'm very invested on paid forward. How do I support
Yeah.
new entrepreneurs learn their year one and year two journey,
Mhm.
best practices when starting, how we support communities now in Honduras by fixing a school, that school project that we were sharing the other day. But yeah, a couple of things there that we're working on, but definitely it's how culture matters. But overall, Ali, thank you very much for making the time. I know you have a very busy
I
agenda
do.
these
I'm
days,
sorry.
and looking forward to our next episodes of putting the talent pieces together. So bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Carlos.
You're welcome.